Hey there, my name's Orion, and today I am joined by my co-host, Trina from My Lady ADHD.
Hello.
And today we are joined by a special guest, Dave Delaney, who is a keynote speaker, author, business coach, and host of the Wise Squirrels podcast.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Dave, I recently heard that you got diagnosed with ADHD.
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Yeah. So I was diagnosed last year. I was in a mastermind group with two other entrepreneurial friends. One I know quite well, and the other I didn't know very well. And after a few months of the three of us getting together once a week and talking through our business woes, one of them, the one I didn't know very well, texted me out of the blue and said, "Hey, Dave, do you have ADHD?" And I wrote back, "No." And he said, and I think you should go talk to your doctor because I do, and I can see it in you. And so I did. I talked to my doctor, did some assessments, and he fired up my charts and noticed that I was actually diagnosed several years ago, but somehow didn't get that memo.
In typical ADHD fashion.
It's not, that is not the first time I've heard a story like that.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. You would think like, I don't know. I'm still like, what's a few more years, right? In a lifetime of not knowing I have ADHD. So I figured I'm not going to get upset about missing the memo somewhere along the way. I don't know whether the therapist didn't tell my doctor or my doctor didn't tell me. I'm not really sure. Or whether he did tell me and then I got home and forgot to tell my wife. Who knows?
Your therapist is just like, yeah, this guy's got ADHD.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, so that was last year. So you've written a book. You've been doing podcasting. You're an entrepreneur. What was this like to find out that you had ADHD?
I said the thing that like if ADHDers were doing a drinking game, the phrase would be, "It all makes sense." Yeah. And then drink. Mine would be non-alcoholic, 4 years sober. But yeah, for me, it was that. It was really just the more I learned about ADHD, the more it all made sense to me. And being diagnosed and being sort of a product of Web 2.0, early internet, even Web 1.0, if you will. I'm very much open and I love sharing, perhaps oversharing, because that's part of it. I started connecting all the dots and realizing, I've got a story to share. And so that's why I created Wise Squirrels, the website and the podcast to kind of share what I'm learning out loud and also interview subject matter experts and, air quotes, high achievers with ADHD. And so I just straight away, I wanted to just share what I was experiencing with the world. And so I joke that I kind of came out of the mental health closet, as it were, and just got on social media and started to tell, "Hey, everybody, guess what? ADHD." And they were all like, I thought he was gay, but anyway.
Don't know how relatable this is. I did the exact same thing 4 years ago.
It's amazing, right? And then one thing that I found is a lot of my oldest friends from the old punk rock days, going to shows and stuff, a lot of those friends started commenting to me privately or publicly on Facebook and so on in different places saying, you would be shocked to learn how many of us have ADHD. And the more I learn about it, the more, in fact, I just wrote a blog post about it at Wise Squirrels today or yesterday about the punk rock connection to ADHD. But yeah. So right away, I just wanted to share what I was learning. And when I started Wise Squirrels, I started podcasting in 2005. And had I known I had ADHD, I probably would have stuck with one show and then, been sitting on a pile of Joe Rogan money at this point without platforming freaks. And so being sort of into the podcasting and early adopter and social and blogging and all that stuff, I just wanted to create the space and start sharing sort of my journey with folks.
It's wild how similar this experience is for a lot of us, like late ADHD. I know both Trina and I were late diagnosed as well. We're both also entrepreneurs. And I know for me, the moment that I found out, it was that like, oh, everything makes sense now, light bulb moment. But then I felt like I need to tell people. If this was that transformative for me to understand all these weird quirks in my past, I want to help other people find this. And then it's funny how we all kind of just congregate around that same kind of like goal. and hyper focus.
Going to say, like, I learned from, well, a couple things. For entrepreneurship, you're 60 to 80% more likely to have entrepreneurial intentions with ADHD, and you're nearly 100% more likely to start a business. So there's that point about it. And there's plenty of famous brands and entrepreneurs out there who, and creatives as well, who have ADHD or learn later that they do. I developed a presentation and training idea called The Root Down, which is going to be my next book, partly about my own journey, but also about kind of coping mechanisms I developed over the years without realizing why I was doing this stuff. But the stuff is still applicable to any neurotype, any person. But the goal of the presentation and the book is to better educate people about ADHD so that if they see it in themselves or someone, a loved one or what have you, they might decide to go and get tested and then hopefully get the treatment they may need. There was a Dr. Russ Barkley, who's, kind of the most trusted name in ADHD, I think. He's retired, but he's got a great YouTube channel. Russ Barkley talked about how with undiagnosed and untreated ADHD, your life expectancy can be up to 13 years less. I shared about that at ysquirrels.com/life if you're interested in reading about that. I've got his video on there too. But the reason why I share that is because this passion project suddenly became a mission for me because I realized, there's much more at stake than just entrepreneurial failure. There's like death. And it could be ODing, it could be driving poorly, it could be suicide, whatever. But there's a lot that goes kind of hand in hand with this. And I think it's important that more people learn.
It makes sense, right? Because I just thinking about like prior to my diagnosis and understanding what was going on, you look at yourself, you look at everybody else who's succeeding and seemingly going about doing life and actually being able to accomplish normal things. And you're like, why is this so hard for me? Yeah. Am I a failure? And you start to internalize all these struggles and not realizing that, no, my brain is actually working against me. I'm having to work harder than these other people are. And it's not the same. I don't know. For me, it was a light bulb moment that completely revolutionized the way that I even viewed my own self. And going from being like, oh, I'm lazy, I'm a failure, there's something wrong with me, I have to try harder, and I'm already trying as hard as I can, to then being like, oh, I understand it now, and now I can work with this. It totally makes sense that the life expectancy thing totally makes sense.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting of like the roller coaster that you do go through on when you first get diagnosed, because I think initially it is like light bulb moments and then maybe relief. And then some of us get to like anger, like, well, what would things have looked like if things, So I'm curious if you had that also, like that feeling of, wait, why did it have to be this way?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think back in 2020, when the world was imploding, before my diagnosis too, we had a bunch of other things go on top of all this stuff that everybody was experiencing, including a tornado that destroyed our kids' school. And then another storm that knocked us out of our house for 3 months while I was dealing with, and at the time I was a speaker for Google, among other stuff, among my own business as well. And all of that kind of shut down. And so suddenly I'm not making much money as a keynote speaker and facilitator. I'm not really doing a lot of speaking. So I'm not getting paid well. And I'm also spending a lot of that time focused on insurance and contractors and trying to get our house back up in order on top of everything else going on, right? So it was an extremely stressful time. So I bring that up. Also, my dad was kind of on the latter stages of Alzheimer's and dementia before he passed away. And because of that, I decided I don't want to get Alzheimer's or dementia, as I would hope everybody doesn't want to get. And sadly, it's a tough one, but there are certain things you can do to help prevent it. And that includes being sober or quitting drinking at least. And that's what I did at the time. Exercise, which is something I started doing more of at the time. Meditation and mindfulness, also something I started doing more of. And even with a CPAP, I got a sleep apnea test and realized, oh, look at that. I also have sleep apnea. And by the way, nothing spices up the bedroom like a CPAP machine, but I digress. I bring that all up because this all, especially the meditation and mindfulness as well, but all this stuff helped me prepare for this diagnosis that I didn't know was coming. And so to answer your question, I've learned so much about reframing and about being better to myself. And I certainly have regrets through life and all that stuff. But the way I look at it is that if I wasn't, for example, if I knew I had ADHD when I was in my 20s, I probably wouldn't have been drinking quite as much and doing crazy stuff that I was up to. And then going off to Ireland to sober up, because that's what you do. You go from Toronto to Ireland to sober up. But going off to Ireland by myself and meeting and running into my wife, my future wife. And so had my life not been a bit of a mess back then, I probably wouldn't have gone to Ireland, and I wouldn't have met my wife there. And I wouldn't be, we're happily married over 20 years. We've got 2 great kids. And so the life I have now wouldn't have happened this way had I not been affected in some negative ways to the ADHD. So this is something I tell people all the time, and I write about as well and talk about on the podcast is this, it's so important. It's fine to look back. Looking back in a productive way, I think, is a better, having regrets and what ifs and all this stuff is something that naturally, I think, to your point, Trina, like I think everybody experiences certainly. But I think, again, looking at it in a different light and realizing, you might not even be here now doing what you're doing and enjoying life, had it not been for that. So I try not to look at it that way. There's also like philosophy where there's this line that if you, it's kind of paraphrasing, but if you think too much of the past, that can lead to depression. If you think too much of the future, that can lead to anxiety. And so the key thing is to be present and focused on now. And that means that's, obviously a great way to be. We're all entrepreneurs. We all have businesses and things. So obviously there's, you got to look at last quarter. You got to look at budgeting and, planning and all that stuff. So obviously, but I think that's a key thing. And if you can focus more on that, on focusing on the present, I think that will turn that around some.
It's pretty common that ADHDers kind of feel now and not now. And so we're actually quite good at staying in the present, I think. A lot of us, it's like a strength. Yeah, it's really interesting. I do find it interesting, the roller coaster of after you get diagnosed, it's not just, oh, well, that's great. It takes some time to process what just happened and what that really means moving forward. And I think that's why a lot of us end up in this rabbit hole of, well, now I have to learn every single thing I can about ADHD. And like Orion, I have to tell people. And it's so impactful to get diagnosed for a lot of us. And so I think that's the piece that I just want to drive home is like how impactful it can be to get a diagnosis. Because I also, in my community, I hear from older folks that are like, what's the point of me going to get diagnosed? Like, I'm this age, I don't want to take I don't want to be on meds. Like, what's the point of me getting diagnosed?
And I think it's really up to the individual, of course. I think the first step is, taking an assessment, even like an online assessment initially to think if you think you have ADHD. I've got one at Y Squirrels, but I don't see the results or anything like that. But the most important thing, regardless of what the outcome is of that, going to your doctor and talking to your doctor about it, assuming you are diagnosed. I think one tip that I always give people is, if you're talking to your doctor, ask the doctor first what their views are on ADHD or ADD or what have you, because that's a quick test to see if your doctor is actually a good doctor. Because if your doctor says, ADHD is not real, then they probably also think cancer is not real. Yeah. And so it's probably time to
get ADHD.
Adults can't. Yeah, exactly. And so as an adult, I think it's really important to talk to your doctor about it. And know, first of all, if you do, and then if you do have ADHD, then to explore treatment. And that can be through therapy, ADHD coaching, both preferably, medication as well. And listen, I'm Canadian or Canarican now, I guess. And I've been proud to never be on prescription drugs at all. And now I'm on prescription drugs, not just for the ADHD, but also for anxiety. But I'm the better for it. And, especially when it comes, and again, not a doctor, nor do I pretend I'm one on the internet, but it's important to understand that there's not a lot of danger involved with stimulants, with ADHD meds. And you can stop them pretty quickly as soon as you start taking them if you don't feel right. And you're working with a doctor. Hopefully you are. That's how you got your prescription. The doctor will adjust the dose or change the meds to find the thing that works best for you. But again, the other thing with ADHD, especially being older, is life may be fine. Like you may not have any problems and you may have untreated ADHD, but things are going great. And that's awesome if that's the case. Yeah. And not everybody needs treatment necessarily, but I think it helps a lot.
Yeah. One of the things that we talk about a lot here is just having the language to be able to describe your experience can sometimes give you the ability to introspect on a deeper level and a more productive way. So, right, like you may have gone your entire life not knowing that you had ADHD, but now that you have the language to explore that, it's like opening a door and being able to then say, oh, this is why I do this thing. And now I can deconstruct if doing this thing in this way is actually productive for me and healthy, or if maybe I need to backtrack a little bit and find a better way to do it that's not so potentially harmful or destructive.
100%. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that gets into what I said at the beginning, which is giving yourself grace.
Yeah.
It's hard to give yourself grace if you don't know what's going on.
Exactly.
Right? If you know what's going on and why, then you can start to address that. And also, for the love of the people in your life or your colleagues or worker or employees or family or friends, like, honestly, like I've learned so much about myself in the last year from reading multiple books and talking to experts on my podcast and folks like you. Learning about this stuff has been so beneficial to me. Just, knowing about it and understanding. I say it's like my operating system. So understanding my operating system is incredibly helpful, and it does explain things like, why I would be excessive in things or why I love standing on stages, delivering keynotes and presentations. It's that feedback from the audience. And I'm like, hello, dopamine. I didn't know I was lacking there, but apparently I was. And so good or bad, I mean, it explains a lot. And even little idiosyncrasies and things, you start to realize, oh, wait, I know why I'm doing that.
You mentioned the Alzheimer's thing too. I know for me, that was a thing before I knew that I had ADHD. My memory is terrible. My short-term memory is absolutely terrible. I have to write everything down. And there was a moment where I was like, do I have early onset Alzheimer's? Is something I have to be worried? And that caused me a lot of stress for a long time because it does run in my family. And I've seen, some friends of mine having to deal with their parents, and that's terrifying. And I can't imagine if I hadn't have received this diagnosis, I'd probably that was a big fear that was hanging over me for a long time. And just being able to know, oh, I have ADHD. My operating system is just bad at file management sometimes.
I've heard that a lot too, that's really common for people with ADHD to think that they have dementia because it just feels like that sometimes with your memory. I also thought I had dementia and I went and got a brain scan. That's how serious I thought my memory problems were,
it's working memory. I mean, we forget things so quickly. I'm the same. Like I'll write things down. I do a lot of voice memos for myself. Mm-hmm. I've gotten to the point where because I've been podcasting for so long, I'll just turn on the voice memo app on my phone. And as I'm walking the dog, I'll just talk. But because I'm recording it, it gives myself permission to even though I'm not doing anything with it, or I might use AI to read the transcript later or something. But just because I'm recording it and walking and talking, it helps me kind of think through things. But I also am able to record those notes so that I can go back to that later. And the worst point of this, it's embarrassing to admit this, but was not that long ago, I was walking and my AirPods died. And I was like, oh, crap. And it was that point where I was like, can I keep talking out loud to myself? Even though I'm not recording now, will anybody know? Nobody will know. And so I think I crossed the line where I'm now like that madman walking down the street. Maybe I always was. I don't know.
I mean, there's all those different things that help with memory, right? Being able to see it, read it, speak it, hear it, all those different things. So that makes sense that helps.
Yeah.
Even if you weren't actually recording it.
Yeah, exactly. And Trina, you said you write things down. You were saying
I try
do
all
you
the
record
things.
It or write it down?
I try all the things. Yes, I have to do all the things. I was actually just bragging to my ADHD coach that I came up with a new system to remember to call and text family and friends because I'm like really not a great communicator with family and friends. And I put a bunch of my family and friends in an album on my phone. And now one of those photos is my background every day. So there's a different family member every day. And so now it's
That's
like
smart.
a game. So when their face pops up, I'm like, oh, I got to text them. So I'm like, I got to try all the things. I have to gamify everything. I got lists. I got reminders. Like I got backup plans for the backup plans to figure out.
That's a great idea. I love that idea.
Well, I'll let you know if it works.
And then once the novelty runs off,
I'll have to change the photos probably pretty regularly to just keep it interesting. But yeah, you learn. But that's the thing is before I got diagnosed, I wasn't trying any of these things really. I was just, wow, you suck at calling friends and family. I was just feeling bad about it. I'm just feeling like a bad human being. And now I'm like, oh, well, my ADHD friend over there suggested this, and that actually is really helpful. And now there's like resources. It's like a whole library of resources also opens up once you get diagnosed.
I've been thinking a lot about the community aspects of ADHD and how we tend to find one another. And then we start to realize that, maybe some of our closest friends also have ADHD, whether they're diagnosed or not. But in thinking that way, and even my own parents, I start to understand why maybe they haven't followed up with me in a long time. And it's not so much because I'm a jerk or I did something or whatever, but more because perhaps they have ADHD and they have not figured out Trina's awesome iPhone hack to remember to check in with Dave. And so I've been thinking a lot about that, like kind of connecting the dots between community and the people in your life.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
That makes me think of my brothers. Me and my brothers, we don't talk to each other that often, but anytime we do, it's like we talked yesterday. We're still just as close. It's awesome. And now that you're saying that, I'm like, we all have ADHD. This makes sense now.
Right. Yeah, well, it's certainly heritable, right? I think it's like 80% chance if you have a parent with ADHD that a sibling or a child does.
This is actually interesting to me because my mom has ADHD, but she has all of these systems in place to help her be on time and to help her remember. She has a lifetime of creating all of these strategies. And so it doesn't appear that her ADHD is as intense as mine is sometimes. And it's frustrating for us to sometimes communicate because we struggle in different areas with ADHD. And so there is still not always grace given because the way that they deal with their ADHD is kind of different than the way I do. So yeah, it's just challenging, people dealing with family.
I mean, my mom is 88 and almost perfect health. And she would take us all in a bar fight. She's awesome. British, stiff upper lip. Yeah, she's got all these, like you're saying, she's got all these like notebooks and she has everything, like she has these systems in place. And I find I'm similar in that way because really these are coping mechanisms that I'd never heard the term coping mechanism. I didn't know what the hell that was. But now I know these are all these systems that I've created in order to write a book years ago and have it published before knowing I have ADHD, right? So like all these different coping mechanisms, I swear that's the other thing that I've been thinking about a lot too, is like every productivity expert, my spidey sense tells me that they're probably an ADHDer. They become an expert at productivity and the world can use these skills and tools and tactics, certainly. But the reason why they became, shall I say, hyper-focused on the topic of productivity, they're trying to find ways to solve their own problem. And that's the same with entrepreneurship so often, especially when we're founders, we're creating things to solve a problem that we have, right? Or that we see a lot of people having. And again, if your community are diagnosed or undiagnosed ADHDers, they probably all have that productivity problem too, which gets back to the entrepreneurs and creatives and that kind of thing.
I almost feel like the diagnosis and understanding the diagnosis gives you permission to have these coping mechanisms, right? So like you can imagine especially in the older generations where it was like, no, you have to figure it out. You have to get it done. So you develop these coping mechanisms because there are no other options. Now that I understand that I have ADHD, this is the thing that's holding me back. I can now go talk to somebody else who has ADHD. I can go look at the community. Like you said, this whole library of different things that we all do to try to solve these problems. And then you end up with people who actually build businesses around it and sell their own ideas.
I just find it interesting because I feel like a lot of these resources really weren't there, especially for women with ADHD up until 4 or 5 years ago also. So there's that whole side of everything, but that's just...
Yeah, but come on, Trina, women never had ADHD.
Oh, I know. When I was diagnosed with ADHD, I thought they were lying. Like, I did not know that women could have ADHD when I was diagnosed. Like,
yeah, and that's because of these different presentations, right?
That's just how big the information gap was. Like, the clinicians and therapists that are here to help us, there was a huge gap between them and the people that needed help. And there's people like you and I and Orion and who built communities just to fill that gap. And it's just so interesting and amazing that people stepped up to do that, because it seems like the healthcare system wasn't really doing that.
No, you're right. I mean, I think it's, my own understanding really is it's sort of a combination between these different presentations of ADHD. This is something I've learned about for a bit, was saying that there are 3 types, and there's not. There's one type of ADHD and 3 presentations. And one of the presentations is the hyperactive. Actually, it's also on the blog. I wrote about this recently, where, you've got the Bart Simpson, who was me very much as a kid. Then you've got the Lisa Simpson, which might have been like you, like where you are more like introspective. You're daydreaming, but you're not disrupting a class. So the teachers you're not bothering the teachers, even if you're not paying attention. And that doesn't mean you're going to get bad grades or anything like that. I mean, you might do great, and then the combined type is the Calvin from Calvin and Hobbes. And I think as you get older, I think everybody sort of to some extent shifts closer to the Calvin, because we all learn these coping mechanisms regardless of what presentation we lean most towards. Again, not a doctor, so this is kind of paraphrasing, but this is sort of what I've learned. And so a lot of women were just completely missed because they were quiet, daydreaming. And then, of course, with misogyny and sexism and all that stuff, they were probably also ignored for that reason too, to some extent. But I also think it's great now that more women are being diagnosed, because in part it's also, as mothers, often you notice your kid might have ADHD. Well, I mean, as parents, and when you take your kid in to start getting treatment for the ADHD or diagnosis, you start learning about it, and you're like, oh, wait a second. Oh, hold on. This is me. But you were missed. And so I've learned that a lot, that like a lot of women especially learn about this because their kid is diagnosed, and then they're like, okay, that makes sense.
100%. I also have heard this a lot.
Yeah.
I think this is why conversations like this and like a lot of what we all are doing in our own spaces is that being able to show ADHD isn't always Bart Simpson, right? And being able to showcase all of these different experiences to say, because you might have a mom, you might have a grandma, you might have a grandpa, you might have a young teenager who's looking at this and saying, that's not me. Like, when you say ADHD, the image of ADHD that I know, that's not me. It doesn't fit. But then to be able to show all these, like the broad spectrum of experiences within ADHD is so wide, and to be able to say, oh, okay, there is community here for me. I can see myself in this. I think it's so powerful.
I find it interesting because it is wide and it is experienced so differently, but yet we all are connected.
Yeah.
In a weird way that I can't really explain to a neurotypical person.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I think you're right on that, because that's one thing consistently that I hear from my guests and experts is no 2 cases are the same with ADHD, right? However, often remind people too that it is an acronym. I mean, there are words there. There are words that it stands for, regardless of how you feel about those words. But so there are commonalities, certainly.
But it is interesting how the differences in the way that we experience those executive function misfires, if you will, differently within our experiences, right? The social pressures, the life experiences, it's the same cause, but the way that it manifests ends up being so different because our brains are so complex.
And it's confusing too, because things change, because this is science, right? And the brain especially, right? Yeah. I mean, we're still learning. So for somebody, if things change over time, ADD becomes ADHD, it doesn't mean it's wrong or whatever. It is science. Like, things are changing because we're learning about it, right? Or professionals are learning about it, at least. And then able to use that and then weave it into to the DSM and so on.
With you being late diagnosis and also being an entrepreneur, did you notice a difference in having a realization of, oh, that's the reason I've been doing this thing, and post-diagnosis, hey, I can now do this better? I'd love to hear a little bit about like how your entrepreneurial life changed post-diagnosis.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. One thing I've figured out is I'm not great at everything. What? I know, right?
Yeah.
Who knew that? And
I
so
don't believe
with this,
it. I don't believe it.
I know. But with this clarity now, I realize like, oh, okay. Somehow I've landed on that I'm not good at every part being entrepreneur. And
you don't
I need
have to
help.
be.
And you don't have to be. I
Yeah.
mean, you need to outsource. You need to get the help that you need in the areas. If it wasn't for my accountant, I probably would be in jail or kicked out back to Canada or something because, So I think it's important to get the support and recognize where your strengths are, which is part of the root down. So for the root down, there are 3 sections. There's know yourself, respect yourself, and then connect yourself. So it's basically about knowing your strengths, understanding strategies to embrace yourself and understand and respect yourself and love yourself, and then connecting yourself, which also fits into this loneliness epidemic that, we're all feeling regardless of our neurotypes, and trying to solve those 3 sort of categories or pillars. And so knowing yourself is so important there. So I think that's a big part of it is finding the support, but then also things like I just this finally, and I don't work for these people, but I should at this point, the time timer. Do you guys use this?
Yes,
Yep.
I have that exact same one.
Oh my God. How have I just got it like recently. And I'm like, how the hell did I do anything without this? This thing, for those who don't know, that's 5 minutes. But when you do it like a full hour,
It's a visual
and then you
timer.
glance down at it, you're like, what? It's all white. And you're like, wait, where did 55 minutes just go? Because I'm still on TikTok. Yeah. So
It is
that's
interesting because it's like a weird shift because like it's a timer might work, a regular timer might work for a neurotypical person, but just the thought process of, well, let's make it more visual helps us so much more. And I know a lot of people that swear by that timer. It is a product that a lot of us use.
Yeah, it's great. And it's analog, which is also refreshing, right? I think as a kind of early adopter in a lot of tech and doing stuff with Google and so forth, I'm nerdy enough, but at the same time, I find switching to analog really does help. And something like where you have it on your desk in front of you all day can really help keep you on task. Because before I would open a tab in Google, just Google timer and set the timer. And that's something you can do in Chrome or most browsers. I'm sure I don't work for Google anymore, so they're paying me. And I would open like a whole tab on my other monitor of this clock counting down. But even then I found it just wasn't as effective. So I definitely find something like this helpful.
Well, it's dangerous, right? Because you open a new tab and, well, now I'm on LinkedIn or I'm on Facebook or wherever you are wasting time. But then I think that timer does a couple of things for us with ADHD, right? You have the visual representation of time. So your time blindness is kind of solved a little bit because you have that awareness. But then also you have the urgency of this countdown clock that gives you that little dopamine boost that you need to actually be motivated and have the inertia to complete the task.
Yeah,
100%. I need to get one. Trina's always flashing hers and I'm like, oh, that looks
but
cool.
I was using mine for a week before I realized that the battery died. So just keep an eye on that.
Yes.
Trina's, man, I'm doing so good. I'm
I just
working
thought
so
I was
fast.
killing all my tasks, but it was
You're
just stuck at
hyper-focused.
15 minutes for a week and a half. Yeah,
You're exhausted and haven't eaten in days.
You're like, my 15 minutes isn't up.
that's accurate. That's so funny.
Well, Dave, this was wonderful. I've enjoyed this
Thanks for having
conversation.
me.
Where can folks find more info about you?
Yeah, drop by ysquirrels.com. I've got the podcast there, some of the articles. I've got a Now What, which is like a free PDF download that I put together with some tips if you've just been diagnosed. But ysquirrels.com, or you can Google Dave Delaney, but I'm spending most of my time with ysquirrels. It's been a lot of fun. I've been talking to a lot of great people like Dr. Bob Bradley, who was NASA's International Space Station director for 16 years. And he wasn't diagnosed until he was 60.
Wow.
That was after he was there. So there's a guy running the space station with undiagnosed ADHD.
That's awesome.
And so we can still achieve a lot in life.
You've been listening to Brainwaves, your guide for all things ADHD. You can find more episodes and resources at shimmer.care/brainwaves. Brainwaves is brought to you by Shimmer ADHD Coaching.
'Cause you deserve to shimmer. Live better with ADHD. You've been listening.
You've been listening to Brainwaves.